Last year, my flower farm did really well, but behind the scenes, I was flying by the seat of my overalls. And this year, I'm doing it differently. Hello, fellow growers and dreamers. If we haven't met before, I'm Lyle. I'm the owner of Bramble and Blooms, a micro farm located in Western Massachusetts in Zone 6A. I actually started this YouTube channel last year with great intentions, but I wasn't able to keep up with it as the season got very hectic very quick. And that's what I want to talk about today. This video is a bit of a reset, not only for the channel, but also for how I'm running my farm moving forward in 2026. A little bit about me. I work full-time in the insurance industry. I'm kind of a professional problem solver, project manager, answer of questions, and connector of people. It can be a lot on certain days, but I love my job. And one of the things that we do a lot of is we build systems that gets to be used by the business. Flowers happen to be the counterbalance to that for me. Back in 2015, I unfortunately had to give up riding my horse as he was getting older. And I was really searching for something that would allow me to be present in the moment like horses required. And that's how I started growing flowers. I started with zinnias and dahlias, entry gateway flowers, and after one summer, I was hooked. I spent hours after work and weekends in the garden, and it was the thing that allowed me to either think what I needed to think through or not think at all if that's what I needed that day. So from the beginning, I've had to work within constraints, which kind of required me to stay small and be this micro flower farm. And at this point, I'm okay with it because my full-time job can be rather demanding. And my husband also works for himself, which is lovely, gives us lots of flexibility in some ways, but also can be equally as demanding at certain times of year as he's a wedding photographer. And it's just a very seasonal demand. It happens to be in high demand when flower season is also in high demand. Although 2025 was my first year in business, I do have to say I felt it was a huge success. One of my biggest wins, which I was pretty excited for, was my crop plan. Now, I'd been growing flowers for years, but growing for yourself is so different than growing for production. So my goal was to have flowers from Mother's Day all the way through to our first frost, which is sometime in early October. And luckily, I was able to hit Mother's Day flowers. I had tulips, which I was forcing for the first time, and by that time we also had field-grown tulips. We had ranunculus, which I had only grown in such small quantities before, and last year I grew about 200. And then I also tried a few other things I'd never grown before, like stock and some filler flowers. And they all were ready in time for Mother's Day, and I was so pleased with that and how well that plan worked. I also knew that I was going to be taking the summer kind of off. I did try to listen to other flower farmers and know that the summer can be really quiet. So I did not do our market that I was participating in from like early July until early August. So there was kind of a lull, which was fine. But then things really picked back up kind of mid-August through the end of September, early October before we got our first frost. And besides having flowers every week for our little market, I also did my first dahlia subscription, which was really exciting. Financially, the only goal I had for myself was to generate $5,000 of income. And I was really concerned about even being able to generate that because we were producing only about anywhere from 10 to 15 bouquets a week when we were going to the market. And that was my main sales outlet. And I did generally sell out, but I also ended up doing a few other things throughout the year that generated a lot more income than I had anticipated. So I about doubled my initial goal of $5,000. However, and we'll talk about this more, I'm sure, in another video, my expenses were really high last year. So while I did generate probably closer to $10,000 in revenue, I'm still working on my books right now, my expenses definitely surpassed that. And a lot of that has to do with some of the things that I decided to implement this year as far as infrastructure and also the purchase of tulip bulbs. Another big win for Bramble and Blooms was the branding. So my undergrad was actually in graphic communications, so I definitely value a well put together brand. And it was something I spent a lot of time on myself. Is there room for improvement? Of course, always. But I got really clear on how I wanted people to feel when they purchased from Bramble and Blooms or saw our logo. I got clear on brand colors, fonts that I used. I just really aimed for consistency. And overall, it definitely paid off. So between June and October, I feel like we really made an impact with how we were viewed in the community and just the recognition of our logo and our brand and our flowers. Bramble and Blooms had a lot of successes in 2025. And while nothing ultimately failed, the way I was running things was just not sustainable. Because I didn't have any systems or solid plans in place, I was constantly reacting instead of being able to strategically think about what I wanted to do or what needed to happen next. And it was exhausting. My full-time job was very demanding, so there's usually lots of meetings, decisions that had to be made, emergencies that would come up that had to be dealt with. So by the end of the day, while I love working on my business, my best decision-making time was during the day, and it was given to my full-time job. So decisions for Bramble and Blooms were often made late at night, exhausted, and maybe with not the best clarity in place. I'm sure some of you can relate to this. One area that showed up the most was when I had a chunk of flowers to sell, which is ironic because flower farming is selling flowers. However, one perfect example of this was I decided to grow tulips in December of 2024. It was a very last minute decision when I was just starting my business. And come January, I knew I was going to have to start growing those tulips, pulling them into the grow space, but I was so unconfident if it would actually work for me, if something would go wrong and I'd have a total crop failure. So I really did not want to commit to anything. So I didn't commit to any pop-ups. I didn't commit to any pre-sales for Valentine's Day tulips, which is the date I was trying to hit. And turns out 2 weeks before Valentine's Day, I had 2,000 very usable stems and no place to sell them. So it was a mad scramble to get a pop-up set up and also to try to move some via wholesale because I knew I could not sell that many in February at a pop-up because at that point I had not even that was my first event ever was a tulip pop-up at a coffee shop. So I knew that I wouldn't be able to sell them all. So I was trying to find another outlet, which ended up being a wholesale. But like I said, mad scramble. And if I had maybe trusted myself a little bit more, that I would have had some success with growing my tulips, even if it wasn't all 2,000, and I accounted for some loss. I think I would have been in a much better spot and been able to sell all of my tulips potentially retail rather than doing some wholesale and some retail. Reflecting back on 2025, I took some time to really see where my friction points were and what was kind of the deep root cause of them. And one of them was just my confidence in my growing skills. While I was confident growing flowers for myself to just cut and put on my table or give to friends whenever the flowers showed up, what I was not confident in was saying that, yes, I will have this flower by this time, or I will definitely have this much of that flower by this time. That felt really foreign to me and uncomfortable to be able to commit to that, knowing that there's so many factors that go into growing flowers and so many things that could go wrong, like Mother Nature just raining and raining and raining all spring long and slowing down crops. So when you're growing for production, you really have to know what you're going to have, how much of it you're going to have, and when it will be ready. And then on top of that, you also probably want to know if it's a flower or a crop that you could hold and store for a certain period of time, or if it's one that has to be moved rather quickly, because it definitely makes a big difference. Another big area that was a pain point, friction point for me was the end of the season. So I had the best of intentions to put our entire farm to bed. Like I said, it's not a big growing space, but October was so full that not everything happened. So we were digging up 600 dahlias between here and the other farm where we were growing. And we also received an order of 9,000 tulip bulbs and daffodils, which all had to be planted into crates to be rooted and cooled for their needed time. And those tulips were being cooled in a cooler that I had not finished building yet. So about a week before the tulips were arriving in early October, I was working around the clock myself to get the cooler finished. And luckily towards the end, I did have some help to kind of get the last minute things done, like the AC in and connected, but it was very stressful. So all of that to say that there was so much going on in October. I didn't leave any time to put the farm to rest. There was just no time. We did have my in-laws here and they were super kind to help do some items for me, but some of it just didn't get done. And right now it's kind of coming back to bite me because I need to plant ranunculus come February. And we did put black plastic down to help keep the soil a little bit warmer, but my hoops aren't in place. So I'll probably be spending this weekend putting up our 4-foot high hoops, getting the plastic over them and getting that soil warmed up to temperature. So come mid-February, I can plant about 600 to 800 ranunculus outside. But I could tell you I much would have preferred to do that in October than now in the middle of January. So the hardest parts of the year for me honestly weren't the growing, because everything did grow according to plan. It was the transition moments in between. Looking back, the problem wasn't effort, it wasn't having enough motivation, and it wasn't that the farm wasn't working, because it was. The problem was that I had no systems in place for the hardest parts of the year. This is the overlaps, the transitions, the moments where everything hits at once. If you've done any flower farming at any scale, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I was relying on adrenaline instead of systems, and that only works for so long. Nothing failed on my farm, but everything felt a lot heavier than it actually needed to be. So all of this reflection led me to choose my word of the year for 2026, which is leverage. I love choosing a word of a year rather than a specific goal because it acts as a framework. So for me, leverage means using what I already know to make my business easier to run. In my day job, I build systems, iterate on them, find the steady state, and help adjust as needed when things stop working. Systems aren't about setting it up once and never looking at it again. They're about guidance, especially when things get hectic. Systems are flexible frameworks I can adjust, not rules that I have to obey. Another important aspect of the word leverage for 2026, besides using skills I have, is also, I hate to say using the people I know, but basically using the people I know in my life to help, whether it's lighten the load actually on the farm or making connections to find and hire somebody that could help on the farm, and reaching out to other flower farmers that maybe have more experience than me to gain their insights into an issue I might be facing. That is leverage that not only will help me, but also help my business and my micro flower farm move forward. And then lastly, the big one for me is leverage isn't always saying yes to everything, especially if it adds stress instead of clarity. As a new business owner, I was inclined to say yes to every opportunity that came up because I really wanted to work on getting my name out there and into the community. And this year, I can't continue on at that rate. So I know that using leverage as my guiding word and principle for the year, that I can assess if an event or an invitation to a pop-up or whatever the case may be is actually going to move the needle for my business, if it is going to feel right for me and for my husband and our time and for our life. I think that's really important because a lot of times you could say yes to something, say, that's going to be 6 months away, and then be kicking yourself for saying yes when you knew you shouldn't have, because it is going to be an event in July and nobody's in town and it's too hot and nobody wants to buy flowers. True story. So with all of that in mind, my goal this year is to share with you what it's actually like to run a small flower farm, not just in the field, but behind the desk. So you'll see growing content behind the scenes of our farm life. But more importantly, I really want to share hands-on DIY projects, not only outside for actual farm use, but also behind the desk. There's so much that I love to do and share that has helped my business, from creating tracking systems all the way to branding and planning. So next week, I'm going to break down a little bit more what didn't work on my farm, and how I got to evaluate those so I can create systems and what I'm creating for 2026 as far as systems. And also, I'm going to provide a PDF for you so you can work on identifying areas that were maybe friction points for you, where you might want to implement some systems of your own. So if you're building a small flower farm around your life, then you are in the right place. Make sure you like and click subscribe, and I'll catch you next week.